I think we learned back at COP26 in Glasgow just how important a voice business has in this. The degree to which, in many ways, business is often ahead of us in the public sector in addressing these challenges and finding solutions, greening their own businesses ahead even of economies as a whole. But also businesses are at the kind of the receiving end of trade rules and regulations. So I think, the great opportunity of this Trade Environment Week, like the Week of the Public Forum, which we just had a couple of weeks ago, is to open up our discussions here in Geneva, to hear other voices, to listen to other people's experiences and to learn from them. And in this case, to learn from business. So this afternoon, the next hour and a half, I hope is an opportunity for us all to hear businesses' side of the story, to understand their real life experience of trading environmental goods and services, what opportunities they see from greening global trade, and what action they think we should be taking as policymakers to unlock those opportunities from greening global trade to the benefit, I hope, of countries developed and developing, and not least to the benefit of our planet. We're joined this afternoon by people from some of the world's leading businesses and business organizations, by Tanya Kumar, who's Deputy Director for Decarbonisation at the Confederation of British Industry, representing almost 200,000 UK businesses, by Mansoor Humayun, who's Co-founder and Chief Executive Officer of BBOXX. I'm probably kind of mispresenting the brand, but BBOXX designs, manufactures and distributes plug-and-play solar systems across Africa, providing energy solutions, sustainable energy solutions to millions of people in Africa. We also got Esther Ann, who's the Chief Sustainability Officer at City Development Limited, which is a leading real estate company based in Singapore with a network spanning 29 countries and regions. CDL advises on green building and low carbon construction, and ranked this year as the 5th most sustainable corporation in the world. There we are. So some of the world's leading businesses in this sector. So I'd like to kick us off with a question to all of our panelists, which is, why is sustainability important to you, and what are you doing about it in your businesses? Tanya.
Thank you very much, Simon, and hopefully you can all hear me on the other end. They're lovely to be here this afternoon. And I think just reflecting on your point from a British business perspective, the last few years has been really pivotal actually for the movement towards decarbonisation and the focus on net zero. If we look at the decarbonisation agenda, that was really turbocharged in the last year with the UK heading up the COP26 summit in Glasgow, but also having the G7 presidency. And both these two pivotal moments globally, we saw a huge focus coming out of the pandemic, this focus really on the opportunity for green growth and the developments of goods and services, but not just from a planetary imperative, also from the economic prosperity perspective as well. And we're seeing businesses really take on this agenda, central to actually how they set out for the future of their business plans as well. So it's become really core to the way that British businesses operate, for them to have a sustainability strategy, a net zero strategy, but also through initiatives such as the UN's Race to Zero, where we've seen hundreds of companies globally, and the UK being a leader in that initiative, with companies setting themselves net zero targets and showing really the art of the possible. But what we've seen as part of this is really that partnerships are pretty critical as part of that. This whole excitement and willingness to really invest now is the opportunity to really double down on green investments. But most notably, obviously, the unfortunate events of the war in Ukraine and the global energy crisis that has also sparked has really put a focus on this transition away from fossil fuels and the need for energy independence globally as well. So that's really focused our minds across the business community here in the UK, and excited to talk about this opportunity here with the panelists from across the world.
Tanya, thank you very much for that. Mansoor, over to you.
No, absolutely. Sustainability is really at the heart of what we do at BBOX, because not only do we consider it to be the morally right thing to do, but it also happens to be the most economic thing to do. In particular around the topic that we're trying to solve, which is the fact that sadly, over 1 billion people around the world don't have any access to electricity. A further 1 billion people around the world have really unreliable access to electricity. 1/3 of mankind does not have access to clean cooking fuels. And when you look at that sort of very large segments of the population, the only affordable thing to do, only right thing to do is to actually install renewable sources of power. So what we do at BBOX is we install solar panels and batteries at people's homes. We put that on financing to households. People pay us using mobile money. So when they pay us, the system turns on. When the people don't pay us, the system turns off. And the daily cost of using electricity or the daily cost of using clean cooking fuel is lower than the cost of diesel, is lower than the cost of kerosene or candles or charcoal or whatever else was being used. And so the really exciting thing at BBOX is that we have millions of customers in 10 countries that are actually choosing to do the right thing, both economically and sustainability-wise. And actually, some of our clients in Africa are some of the first citizens globally that are becoming net zero households. So there's an enormous opportunity for the developing world, in particular Africa, to actually leapfrog the energy transition and to actually be a real contributor to net zero.
Mansoor, thank you very much. I'd like to come back in a second, actually, to talk a little bit more about that African experience and the kind of the opportunities there. I think it's a really interesting theme, in particular in kind of terms of the debate here about developed and developing countries. Esther.
Yes. Hi, Simon. Thank you for having me. Hello from Singapore. Well, definitely I've been involved in sustainability, since like almost 2 decades ago. And I would say that the last couple of years, the ESG really exploded into the mainstream, whether it is in the parliament or boardroom, on the business agenda, or even at home and all. And we are in the building sector, construction building sector. We build home, we build properties, and we are landlord and hotel owner. In fact, even you are not in the real estate sector. Real estate is very close to you and close to the heart of everyone. You live, work, and entertain in buildings. So in fact, research shows that people spend 90% indoors. So how building users use their buildings has a huge impact on the environment. And building sector also account for 40% of global greenhouse gas emission. So this is where we feel that we can make a difference, and therefore in the building environment, we have actually stepped up for a long time already. And actually, I was at COP25, but the message was not as urgent. And COP26, just now Simon and Tanya also talking about it. Everywhere I turn at Glasgow, there is always race to zero and remind us that, hey, net zero is the North Star goal. And I think what has actually really driven it so fast, it was also because of the financial sector. If you look at the whole value chain or ecosystem of people who control money. Asset Owner Net Zero Asset Owner Alliance was formed in 2019, and Insurance Alliance Net Zero July 2021, and also during Glasgow we have the Net Zero Banking Alliance and also the GFANZ, the Glasgow Financial Alliance. You almost look at it from the regulators, stock exchanges, banks, insurance company, investors, and research firm, analysts, almost everyone who will be making important financial decisions. No business can thrive without the support of bankers. And with the company like us, you can't, go against, what the investor told you. And now investors have made it very, very clear already. It's like BlackRock, they are not looking at just climate strategy, they're looking at net zero strategy. And positive screening, negative screening is front and center. So the business case, for net zero and sustainability has never been stronger. So of course I will, I can share a little bit more that we can't just look at mitigation. In fact, you have to look at adaptation, because in this era of climate emergency, just play defense will not work. You have to, like soccer, you have to attack. You have to adapt. Make use of solution technology. Otherwise, you can't move the needles towards net zero. And of course, Race to Zero now has already supporting cities, organizations that exceeded 90% of global GDP. So the force for change is there. Even you don't want to change, you will be left out. So in order to do so, I think everybody, every country, whether it is you are in the, a developed country or developing country. And of course, I can share a little bit more, the great potential in ASEAN, which is really, experiencing very rapid urbanization, and also, is set to be, the probably fourth largest economy, in the next decade or two. So I think, yeah, definitely, we are all joining this Race to Zero. Thank you.
Esther, thank you very much for that very enthusiastic opening from our three panelists here today. I'd like to kind of just go back to each of you with a kind of follow-up question, if I may, and then open up the floor here in the room to see if we have questions and comments from people here. But just to kind of pick up, first of all, let me take Mansoor first. I mean, you mentioned, Mansoor, kind of the opportunities here, and obviously kind of your business, Bbox, is particularly active in Africa, and you kind of alluded to some of that. I mean, if you could just dig down a bit deeper into that, and you spoke of the kind of the possibilities for developing countries to sort of leapfrog, if you like, into greener businesses. Can you say a bit more about what does that look like in Africa, and how are you seeing countries benefiting from the potential of the sort of green transition, and what are the barriers there? What's holding Africa back?
That's a big question. Let me try my best in terms, especially the last point that you raised. I think that the big aspect around energy is that it has this element of becoming increasingly decentralized, it's becoming increasingly digital, and it's becoming increasingly decarbonized. So those are sort of big themes of the energy transition and sustainability that's taking place. And how we articulate that in Africa is the fact that we install each system per household. So each household becomes its own producer of electricity, its own consumer of electricity. So the sort of production and consumption at the household level starts taking place. Because we can monitor the household remotely using smart meters, and people pay us digitally using mobile money or other digital forms of payments, you already have sort of digitalization of the grid taking place as well. And it just happens that the most efficient decentralized solution from an economic perspective happens to be renewable at the same time. So that aspect means that the sort of the 3D strategy of decentralized, digital, and decarbonized is actually happening at scale first in Africa. And I really think in 100 years' time or 50 years' time, people consuming and producing their own electricity, storing their own electricity, etc., will become one of the norms across the world. It just happens to happen first in Africa. The second thing, what happens by doing so is actually you develop a relationship with a client that is above and beyond just being a utility, because you have a trusted relationship with that household, both physically, in a sense that we have delivered the product, physically installed the product among a population group that's very remote. There's a lack of distribution networks, etc. And you also have developed a relationship with the client digitally as well, in a sense that you have payments coming in, you have information coming in, etc. So you can get a credit score of that household. So suddenly you took a customer that literally lived in darkness, and you're actually providing them energy inclusion, financial inclusion, giving them a digital identity, and that digital identity in the form of a credit score, we actually use to be able to upsell other things, TVs, radio, shaver, fridges, etc. And the biggest realization actually at Bbox to date has been that the opposite of poverty is actually not dollars per day. I think that's completely wrong. The opposite to poverty is having access to products and services. So if a household can get electricity, if they can get water, if they can get clean cooking gas, they can get other services over time, they might not become rich, but they escape that extreme poverty. And so really the opposite of that is opposite of poverty is really having access to products and services. The barriers in Africa, there are, I would say, two major barriers to scale. One, there's a lot of systematic risk that people perceive that is really, really much bigger than the real risk. So that the perceived risk and real risk, there's a real delta there that holds back a lot of money to come into the continent. And the second thing, I think that's something that people never fully appreciate. In my opinion, Africa is the most innovative continent on earth. A lot of things happen there fast. In fact, fintech was invented in Africa. It was invented in Kenya. M-Pesa was the first fintech solution from a digital perspective. The first telecom network in the world, mobile telecom network, was first implemented in the DRC. Those are so just a few aspects of things that people forget. So Africa has a strong, strong history of implementing modern solutions fast. And I think if we can change that perception that Africa is a place of innovation, and that we can change the perception of real risk versus perceived risk, I think a lot of things can happen at scale in that amazing continent of Africa.
And so thank you for that rather inspiring account of the possibilities there and what you're seeing on the ground. That's great. Esther, can I pick up something you said? I mean, you kind of spoke about how you're sort of transforming your sort of real estate business and the importance of the business to all of us as people who live in homes and work in offices or factories. And you spoke in particular of kind of the ASEAN angle on this. Tell us a little bit more about how you see the opportunities, not just in Singapore, but across the region in terms of sort of green building and low carbon construction. What's the process of change look like to you as a business that's right on the kind of front line of this?
Mm-hmm. Well, definitely. I mean, I have the honor to be, sitting on chairing the corporate advisory board of World Green Building Council. So our mission is really to promote green building, and not just to build green in the infrastructure, but building green means building resilience. Resilience in terms of the planet, the people, and the economy. So this is what we've been trying to do. We have about 70 Green Building Council worldwide, and of course, Asia Pacific. We also have stepping up on the engagement as well, and being an ASEAN region, being going through very rapid urbanization. And there are a lot of building going on. There are a lot of construction going to happen, and I mean, even one of, our biggest country, Jakarta is moving, their capital to another city. Can you imagine the amount of constructions that is going to happen in the next decade, and it's already happening. There will be even more and more as the population grows, and definitely. And then one data is very interesting in ASEAN. About 60% of the population is 35 years and below, and these are the force for change that they will expect better life, more sustainable living, and also better appreciation of the future of the planet and of the environment, and So I think all these are driving force, not just about business, but don't forget green consumerism is on the rise everywhere, and I think ASEAN has huge populations, and especially these younger consumers, and they are also employees as well. They will push their the employers to be more responsible, to be more sustainable, and research has already shown that the younger generation, whether millennial or even Gen Z, they prefer to purchase goods from sustainable source and producers. So there are just so much, striving, behind all these, green economy, the transition to green economy. And if I could just quote Singapore, that we are a very small city-state, and we have almost zero, natural resources, and all our, building material, all if not most, are actually, rely on import. And how can we, turn, make use of, turn like trading incentives and all those into our favor, that we can bring in more environmental friendly materials. I think that is really our wish, and hopefully we can bring in the solutions and technology. And on the other hand, we have been working really, really hard on like prop tech and fintech, and because the natural resources that we have is human being, is our people, because we don't have, steel, wood, or, sand and cement and all. So we are looking at a lot of R&D, even turning waste into, sand and concrete, material. So there are a lot of, innovations that has good reason for us to really gear up and, turn, and collaborate with neighboring country, and also invest in R&D, in even in the States and other part of the world as well. So it's a very exciting time. Net zero, of course, give us a lot of pressure and also a lot of driving force behind us. And in fact, in research also show that in order for companies to achieve net zero, only 55% can rely on energy solution, renewable energy and energy efficiency. The other 45% actually rely on circular economy solutions. So this is something that is very, very interesting. And that is also something that trading can actually take the model of sharing and circular economy to serve environmental purpose as well. Yeah.
Esther, thank you very much for that. Tanya, I mean, you represent, as I said, 190,000 odd British businesses. What do they tell you about the sort of the challenges or the obstacles for those of them working in trying to trade in environmental goods and services?
Yeah, I think a lot of them see the opportunities, and just reflecting on some of the bits that Esther and Mansoor have reflected upon, is that we're looking at a whole change in some parts to the energy system and how we view energy. It's becoming so much more interconnected. But the principle that Mansoor was talking about, the energy trilemma, you're seeing this balance between security, affordability, and decarbonisation all coming to the forefront once again. Business is actually quite optimistic, actually, that a lot of the solutions are already out there. We're already doing a lot of innovation that actually exists. So if we're looking at wind, if you're looking at solar, these are technologies that we've been talking about for a long time. But then speaking to Esther's point about buildings, for instance, one of the big challenges there is about the access to data, and globally as well, how do you measure your impact? So looking back to what I was talking about, Race to Zero, we've had this huge focus on scope 1, 2, and 3 emissions. Now, one of the biggest challenge is, how do you actually measure all of those component points along the way? And the most difficult part being scope 3, right? In a lot of these conversations, we keep on talking about how do you disentangle and understand where do your emissions come from in the supply chain, because it's a lot easier to understand, power sources, and that data has improved. And then, the transport of goods and services becomes, increasingly more difficult. So that's one aspect around data. The second bit that's difficult is the standard setting. As well. So as we are developing technologies, making sure that everyone's using the same set of standards. And that's something that really demands a lot of collaboration through forums like the WTO, understanding, are we using the same metrics globally? And it requires a lot of to do that, a lot of sharing of best practice. And most recently, actually, the International Energy Agency found that there is a bit of a collaboration gap that's occurring. And that's basically because everyone's looking at their own sort of net zero or decarbonisation strategies and looking at it at an individual basis. And that's why things like COPs are very significant, actually. When we look ahead now in the coming weeks, we'll see the synthesis report coming out after everyone's sort of sent their revised NDCs. And that's something really to look forward to see actually where are the component points across economies that we need to focus in on increasingly more. but also how do we share that best practice? Mansour's point, we don't need to keep on reinventing the wheel here. We need to share what each continent is very good at and make sure that there are parts of the world that will be able to leapfrog. For the UK, we are heralded for our work on offshore wind policy, something that we've exported to the rest of the world. Something else that we're looking at the moment that's been spurred on by the latest energy crisis is looking at this point around decentralized energy systems. And we're already finding that's quite complex to disentangle in the UK. And we're relatively a smaller country to others. So how can we share that so that we improve those understandings, but also understanding that different parts of the world will specialize in different technologies as well. So look at the big focus now currently on solar that we're looking at the UK. There's a lot of learnings that businesses are looking at interacting with those in Africa or in the ASEAN region to understand how can we make the best of what each other are learning.
Tanya, thank you very much. Before we move to the floor and listen to sort of questions and comments from the room, but I was going to ask you all kind of one more sort of general question, which I hope will kind of resonate with people at least here in this room, and that's, what's the role that you see the kind of the multilateral trade community, the WTO, playing in unlocking some of those barriers to growth in green trade in general, but environmental goods and services in particular? How can we here as kind of a member-driven organization, as we always say, how can we as governments help the private sector green our global economy? Why don't we start with Esther this time?
Let me unmute. Yeah, so definitely we will appreciate, easier or more, incentives in terms of trading, because we import a lot of building materials, honestly, like steel, cement, and all that are big ticket item, and without that, we can't, build basically. So definitely we hope that, there will be better incentive and better terms, to make it easier for us to tap onto sustainable building material. And businesses always have this perception that going green is expensive. A lot of businesses, which is actually not wrong. And in the industry, technology, we all believe that technologies are already here for us to build net zero building, but it is still costly. So how can we, tap onto more affordable and more accessible building material that are sustainable, that are greener, that will really help to push the agenda of net zero. And of course, like I said, there will be actually circular economy, more innovative type of material as well. Definitely, how to decarbonize is on the top of mind of almost every business. And just now, I just talked about the ASEAN region. In fact, there's also data to show that there are millions of people has no access to, energy. And there's a lot of potential for us to, just look at providing energy and, for the just transition for people who do not have access to energy and clean water, to ride onto, this development and become a more sustainable, planet for everyone. Yeah.
Let's go to Tanya this time.
Thank you. And like you said just then, forums like this are so important. I think thinking about three things that are front of mind for us when we talk to businesses is, firstly, looking at, the removal of tariffs on environmental goods, essentially allowing environmental goods to play on that same level playing field at the moment. That delta is still there. So for example, you've got many imported oil related products that, were zero rated, whereas things like components on offshore wind turbines weren't receiving the same treatment. So we've got a long way to go to actually talk a little bit more about what would be on that list and classified as an environmental good or service. Secondly, as I've mentioned again, repetition, but the importance of international standards, especially as we're all focusing on same sort of set of technologies and discussing with each other to make sure that there is that uniformity as well, pretty critical for supply chain development globally. But, you know, the work that Esther's doing on materials, for instance, if you're importing from one part of the world, then you need to make sure that the standards are still being upheld to that same level, and increasingly important if you've got net zero targets as a country as well. So using forums like also the ISSB that are looking at financial disclosures, you've got the TCFD as well for the financial sector, but also the development for the Task Force for Nature-related Disclosures as well. We need to make sure that these are all harmonizing to one set of standards that we can all adhere to and all understand and are easy to implement at the end of the day as well, because the biggest issue for businesses is a lot of the reporting functions, so making sure that there isn't duplication across all of that. And then making sure that we are reviewing trade practices to modernize for some of the ambitions that we have on climate, because what we're seeing on climate is moving at a different pace to trade. So making sure that there's a little bit more synergy that's taking place. After all, we're setting ourselves, you know, that 1.5 degrees target as well. So how do we make sure that that's embedded within trade policy alongside climate policy as well?
Thank you, Tanya. Very practical suggestions. Mansoor.
One area that I am really interested by is the role of carbon financing and carbon credits. I really think carbon credits and carbon financing is going to play an instrumental role in bringing the world to net zero and beyond as well. Right now, carbon credits is one thing that WTO could maybe help fix or influence. Is that it's quite a very complex system, right? Where you have German ETS at a certain price, voluntary carbon price in Africa at a different price, Korean ETS at a different price. One ton of carbon saved in X country is not equivalent to a carbon saved in Y country. I need to remind everyone we breathe the same air, so it shouldn't really matter. And I think that can really accelerate a well-functioning carbon market that has ability to be cross-border, has the fungibility to cross different jurisdictions. It can be super transformative to the energy markets and energy transition. And I feel that there is a bit of a disconnect right now between the policymakers, the people that make up rules in country and international trade and sort of the climate activism that also takes place. So I think a more coordinated approach on carbon credits and carbon financing would play an enormous role across all of the industries that we just talked about.
Mansoor, thank you very much for that. I want to kind of open up the floor now. We have a sort of 50 minutes or so left. I wanted to open up the floor now to people in the room or online if they have any questions or comments to the three of you. I see the EU and I see the OECS. Should we do the OECS first? Oh, Antigua. Ambassador.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, Ambassador Manley. And I want to say thank you very much to our panelists, Tanya, Esther, Mansoor. And I think, you know, Trade and Environment Week, I think is very apt, very appropriate. There's an organic relationship, I think, between the two. And my general impression actually is very positive, that businesses are beginning to see the potential of green development, of green investment, and of moving in that direction, and to adopt sustainability strategies and to actually bring green business mainstream. I think that's very, very important. And I have learned a lot from the three expositions here this afternoon. What I have not heard is you know, the world environment has reached where it is, and this is part of the linkage between trade and environment because of trade also. Companies have polluted the environment. And I would like to hear a little bit more about companies. I get the impression that there are companies that seem to want to move forward to a green transition without looking back. And there is the polluter pays principle. And we know that certain countries are actually bringing cases, legal cases. There's one before the ICJ, there's one before the International Tribunal on the Law of the Sea, in which an OECS member state is involved, actually. And so I would like to hear a bit more. These cases are for loss and damage relating to climate change. And I would like to hear a bit more about how companies can play a role in cleaning up the mess that has been made before moving on, well, not before, but while moving on also to the green transition. We have the UN Plastics Treaty in development, and it's acknowledged that there is work to be done in the area of cleaning up the environment and transitioning to a green future. So perhaps something could be said about that. Thank you.
Ambassador, thank you very much for that. I think I'm tempted to kind of take a kind of 2 or 3 questions or comments, if I may, and then come back to our panelists. So let's bear in mind that one about sort of corporate responsibility, loss and damage, and give our 3 panelists a kind of moment to think about their responses on that. But let me take got a European Union, I think, in the room, and then see if anybody else wants to come in.
Thank you, and thank you in the first place for having organized this extremely interesting session, and thank you for your highly interesting presentations. I have 2 questions. The first is to Tanya and Mansour. So you both refer to goods and services and access, one from an access point of view and the other tariffs, which I assume is also access. So Mansour, you say very interestingly, the opposite of poverty is access to goods and services. Do you mean that locally, or is there, can I give an international dimension to it? Are you referring to specific goods and services to which Africa needs to have access to get out of the opposite of poverty? And I found it also very inspiring, your intervention, that Africa is the most innovative place on the planet. I thought that was a very nice pitch. Then also to continue on goods and services, question to Tanya, you seem to take the pitch that we need to eliminate tariffs, and I would be interested to understand which products and whether this is from a UK perspective or globally. Is this linked to Mansour's question, you need to eliminate tariffs so that Africa gets access, or is that a different access question? And then on standards, I found that very interesting as well, the Esther on standards, and I would be interested in understanding these best practices. I thought that was a very interesting remark. Would that be new standards, and is that then government-led, or are you telling us that business actually has developed lots of good practices and that we need to stimulate collaboration among business? But because I see your point on standards, and we're developing future standards, so I see the point of collaboration.
You, Madeleine, thank you very much for that. Any other questions or comments in the room here? If not, can I let me come back to our 3 panelists anyway. A series of good questions and comments there from our colleagues from Antigua and Barbuda and OCS and from the European Union. First of all, about sort of corporate responsibility, I suppose, for loss and damage. What's your take on that? What's your take of your members? And secondly, about environmental goods and services, a quite specific question to Mansour on the African dimension of that, but I think also more broadly about which products we should be looking for tariff elimination. Why don't we start with Mansour, because one of those questions was quite kind of specifically focused on you, sir.
Yeah, let me just talk first about the carbon and corporate responsibility. I think the reality here is, from my perspective, this industrial age that we've built has been largely been fueled quite literally by fossil fuels, right? To get to this stage. I think there's probably a balance between punishing that progress that fossil fuel has given us, right? Has given us the modern economy, etc., versus punishing the environmental damage we collectively have brought onto the world. Like we are also the users of this big corporate products end of the day as citizens. I think that the fairest way, in my opinion, we've thought a lot about this, is really carbon credits. Carbon credits really need to be priced at the point where consumption of carbon-related products become more expensive, and the benefit of carbon replacing products become more affordable and more attractive. And if the investment case starts moving towards that renewable side, I think companies and organizations will make those better choices even quicker than what they're doing right now. I think today they're doing it from an aspect of fear rather than complete economic rationale. And I think we need to make sure that economic rationale sits at the heart of that transition completely. So really, I think the fairest mechanism is some sort of carbon pricing, and that carbon pricing could be potentially reflective on historic pollution as well, not just current pollution, as an example. On the poverty side, I'm glad that you like that aspect. It's very much driven by our own experiences, which is that if you imagine a farmer in, say, rural Togo, for him to be able to grow more crops, he needs access to water. To be able to have access to water, he can't afford the $2,000 water pump or $1,000 water pump to have access to water. So the only way that he can grow more crops is if he can give him a water pump that he can pay per day. He can pay $1 a day or half a dollar a day, etc. Now suddenly he has access to water that because he is able to pay on a daily basis. Then he uses that water to be able to, for his livestock or for his crops, to be able to grow more crops or produce more milk or whatever it may be. And that results in an additional income. That additional income, then he can choose to be able to have, say, electricity or clean cooking. So now he replaces charcoal or kerosene or etc. from his household as well. If he has electricity at home, the chances are that he will also put some machinery to be able to pre-process some of his agricultural crops, like cutting and chopping and packaging, etc. Right? Small-scale enterprises take place. So this is where I was saying that the opposite of poverty is not if you just put $1,000 or $500 in that farmer's pocket, it wouldn't solve poverty. Because he would still not have access to the products and services that he needs to be able to get to the next level. So the key thing here is, how do you link the physical access to products and service? And when I say service, I mean also access to markets. You link that with financing so that people can have access to the financing that takes place, and to logistics. So once those three things are in play, you can actually see a credible path of lifting people out of poverty. Hopefully that answers the question. Of course, that it can be applied from a national perspective as well. You can extend that same concept from a household to society to country.
Thank you, Mansoor. Tanya, want to say a word, perhaps particularly about sort of the corporate responsibility piece?
Yes, definitely. And I think it's a very apt question to be asking. I think what we've seen in the last few years is that real step change, right? Because we've seen every part of the ecosystem have this focus on sustainability and decarbonisation, and policymakers as well. Because historically, what has happened is that our economic models or business models, etc., has not valued emissions, it has not valued nature as part of that. And obviously loss and damage is a key focus for the upcoming COP summit in Sharm el-Sheikh, because we haven't been accounting for that. And it's going to take a process. And as part of that, transparency in the data bit is key. But at least we're starting from those conversations now to understand what has taken place to date, and how do we change those models going forwards? And that's something that we're looking at in the UK as part of our policy development, things like our Environment Act as well, or net zero strategy that was created last year, is looking at where some of those tensions lie. But also, to Esther's point, there's a huge focus here because you've got the finance community as part of these discussions as well. And that has really turbocharged the way that we look at this globally, not only as, you know, individual countries. So there is a long way to go in terms of that step change, but you've also seen this critical mass of businesses taking that first step as well. So the larger businesses setting that trajectory for smaller businesses to also follow, but also the disruptors and other businesses that are changing the course of business models that we've seen to date on how we use energy, on how we transport ourselves. This innovation is critical because what the future system will need is not what, as Mansour mentioned, fossil fuels have done in the past for us. We require completely different systems that are able to adapt to different sources of energy, that look at the impact of nature as well. So this is a huge turning point because we are confronting that corporate responsibility. And the next generation, as Esther mentioned as well, they are this generation that are being impacted day in, day out, and that they're going to change how business decisions are being made. The way that boardroom discussions are being had now, that is also a big step change because you've seen the invention of things like the chief sustainability officer. So the fact that this is now a boardroom discussion as well, and someone is taking ownership and accountability of these decisions, is going to reap rewards for us when we come to looking at decarbonisation and net zero. So it's definitely a huge focal point for us as the UK, but also how do you enable businesses globally to be having these conversations as part of how they get measured as a business. Then just to the point around the access to tariffs, the question there, it's something that we focused here on the UK, but also globally as well, because environmental goods aren't given that footing. And this comes up against, you know, that question that we need sustainable economic growth going forwards. And that's where you need to see the treatment of environmental goods, and a broad definition as part of that needs to be looked at. So not just from a UK perspective. And then this point around standards as well, a good, you know, looking at how different technologies are being developed. That's why you need that consistency that's happening across the piece. And as Mansour mentioned, carbon markets, emission trading systems are going to be critical as part of that. But no doubt it's going to be sort of a slow process. But that comes back to the point that I was also making before, that obviously data and how we record emissions and impact on nature, that's going to be pivotal as well. So that when an activity is having, you know, an impact on the environment, we are consistently accounting for that. And discussions at the WTO are going to be really seminal in that going forwards.
Tanya, many thanks. Esther.
Wow. Okay. I kind of agree, you know, more, you know, with the other two speakers. If I could just, use our own business models to look at, you know, how to address like corporate responsibility. It is no longer a good to have. You know, when I first started, you know, to the journey in 1995, ESG used to be considered as non-financial, good to have, and but today, and I think that a lot of, you know, business leaders already declare Milton Friedman's ideologies dead now. It's no longer business is no longer about short-term profits. We have to look at, you know, the so-called triple bottom line, because without a healthy planet, there won't be people in market for businesses to thrive and make profits. But from a business perspective, I will also, debate that business have to maintain financial viability first, and also, you know, not at the expense of planet and people, so that you can use what you can take from the, you know, market and contributes to help to conserve the environment and also to do good for people. So all these are related and intertwined. But how do you know that a company is doing good, you know, or just profiteering? So what get measured, get managed. So that is exactly where the standards and ratings and all that, because if every country, every company use a different standard of reporting, ESG disclosure. It will be very hard for investors or any stakeholder to really know who is doing better, who is worse. So that is also why when we talk about harmonization of standards, it is going to be a mind-boggling exercise. And actually, according to experts, there are actually 600 ESG ratings and standards and framework and all. So of course, when we talk about reporting, we are now zooming in, on like ISSB, which is backed by IFRS, and it's a lot of accountants and financial, professionals are pushing for it, which is a very good, move. And then don't forget, there's also GRI as well, which has been around for 25 years, looking at not just investor perspective, but also looking at environmental and social and human rights perspective. So my, as a practitioner for over 2 decades, my hope is for the standards to have like both, the 2 pillars approach, look at what investor need to know, and also take a look at, measured our impact on the environment and people as well. So both are complementary. And so this is something that, it will help investor or bankers and financiers and insurance, companies to make that $1 million decision. And just now we're also talking about nature-based solution. I can't agree more, because like TCFD, we're talking about climate-related financial disclosure. And in fact, now moving very fast now is TNFD, which is about nature, disclosure, and also its financial, impact. So we have all these, and of course, I'm also a strong supporter of CDP and SBTI. And of course, there's also the whole world is also looking at like greenwashing. You have heard this term, very often, and how companies report their performance, ESG performance is very important. If a company just pledged for net zero without telling you a pathway, without aligning with like, okay, using SBTI framework, and, it will be greenwashing in a way. So when you are pledging for net zero, a company need to be specific, whether it is like, by phases, or what is the specific goals and targets, by when and how. All these, the pathway action plan must be clearly disclosed. So for us, we actually adopt the World Green Building Council, pledge for net zero 2021. We actually, February, we pledged for net zero. In November at Glasgow, we supported World GBC to adopt the whole life carbon cycle. So you look at, from how you purchase material, design and build and construct, and how you engage the whole value chain of architect, design, engineering, contractor, and how you manage building, and how you engage people, building users. Everything, you have to account for it. And of course, just now, the other speaker talking about carbon pricing. Yes, it's a very important, a driver for change, because you have to pay for the, what you are using. So carbon pricing in Singapore, we are going to increase by 5 times in 2 years' time, and 9 times in another 2 more years' time. So definitely that will be a deterrent, and also a driver for companies to look for decarbonization, to really look for technologies and solutions to lower your carbon footprint. And last but not least is about supply chain, because SBTI look at scope 1, 2, and 3. Scope 3 comprises the embodied carbon, the building materials, comprises what, our tenants, our suppliers' footprints are. So their carbon footprint is my carbon footprint. So the bigger player have to bring the SME along, and then you will have really create the ripple effect. Not just the big listed companies are doing it, but also bringing the supply chain along. And with that, then I think we will really can accelerate the, the steps on, towards a net zero future. Yeah.
Right. Apologies. So thank you very much, Esther. I have a question that's also come in sort of by email from one of those who's dialing in today. It's Mahesh Sugatan from TESS here in Geneva, who asked a bit about this of, what's the the role of services in all of this, and what are the barriers that you see to environmental services that can be climate friendly, and what's the relationship for you between what's the correlation there between the barriers in terms of environmental services and those we see in terms of environmental goods? So we want to have a go at that. I know you've touched upon it a bit before. Any of the three?
I can answer it quite quickly. From
Go
my
on.
perspective, they're quite interrelated, to be honest, right? So if you install a clean cooking stove or a solar system or a water pump, it requires continuous services of maintenance, of repair technicians, etc. So in many ways, what's happening by introducing new products into a market, you're also creating an entire new service industry around that as well. And a very different set of jobs as well. And this service industry jobs tends to be much higher quality jobs than the jobs that existed before it. So I think they sort of go hand in hand, especially if you look at from a sustainability perspective. A lot of businesses have moved away from sell and forget sort of business model into a relationship business model, right? And she moved into a relationship business model, that sort of physical product that you're selling is really just an entry point to some sort of long-term relationship with the client, and hopefully you're monetizing that in different way. I think that's true in real estate, as it's in energy, as it's in shipping or other industries. So I think that from my perspective at least, it has the potential to create a lot of high quality jobs, new jobs, and for a new set of industries being created as part of this energy sustainable transition.
Thank you, Mansoor. Anything that either Esther or Tanya wants to add to that?
No, I completely agree, Mansoor. And during our discussion, we've been talking also about, the financial services sector is part of that. And as you rightly noted, the business models are changing, the way that we utilize assets as well. To Esther's point on green buildings, you're building today for the future already, that is 2050, when we focus on net zero. So it goes back to the fact that we need to look at this system as interconnected now. It's not just in silos as well. So that's why looking at trade just through the goods aspect, when we're talking about environmental goods, has to be categorized beyond just goods itself. There is a reporting function, there's a data function as well. You've got companies that can be looking at, the energy efficiency globally. Take, large companies that have stock globally, they'll be looking at those assets. What is the impact going to be? And that's increasingly important, isn't it? Because we've got, to Mansoor's point, we all breathe the same air. There is one climate as well. So it becomes increasingly important to be looking at this from a multifaceted approach. And that's why the way that we look at it as part of climate and trade policy also has to evolve in keeping with the way that we're looking at decarbonizing economies.
Yeah, if I could just quote two actual business example, to look at how actually there are multiple solutions or partnership in solving, some ESG issues. Like, okay, for building sectors, building maintenance and operations, and always very high in terms of labor intensive area. So in fact, we have developed a digital platform that help to manage buildings in a more resource efficient manner, and also reduce manpower using a lot of DI, sensors, thousands of sensors, to really look at which part of the building really need resources. If there's nobody there, it's not rocket science. If there's nobody there, you don't need the air condition, you don't need lighting and all. And with digital, you can reduce reliance on people walking around. And in fact, with this particular digital hub that we developed, we actually make use of our so-called SDG innovation loan, which is a sustainability linked loan. And with that, we actually scale up this particular digital, solutions, and to a larger, not just serving our own building, but to the whole industry. And it is endorsed by also the government authority that it is working well. So the bank actually gave us discount because it is sustainability linked loan, that we have a few terms that if we can serve all tick the boxes, then the bank offer, a few basis points discount on upon this $250 million SDG innovation loan. So I thought, this will be a good example to link all this together. You do better, you can actually gain better access to, more favorable terms in terms of financing. And you can also use the fundings to, accelerate, green building performance as well. So I thought this may be something that I can demonstrate, which is an actual case, actual business case that we posted online on our website as well. Yeah.
Thank you, Esther, for that really kind of concrete example of what we're talking about. Can I just check if there are any other comments or questions in the room at this point? Anybody else want to come in here? Yes, please, gentlemen over here.
Thank you, Simon, for the floor, and thank you all the panelists for today's talk. Indeed, it's very important for us to build knowledge and to be really updated on what's going on around the world regarding the climate change issue, but also we are very much interested to know a bit more how we can do our part in the trade rules, particularly. If we look at the trade and climate change issues from the perspective of development, clearly we see the path is already muddier for those who are at the lower spectrum of the development in the global arena. Those who are at the top already made the path, which is not the right path to follow by the others. But the question is how we can, shape the rules of these organizations so that everybody can have a fair share of the development. Mansoor was mentioning the trading scheme, which is not the same across the board, but that's one part. How those who are at the lower spectrum of the development, can also see these. This is an interest. This is indeed an opportunity, not a threat for their development and policy objectives. And that is the main dilemma we have when we talk about the trade and climate change issues and the rules to shape our world. Thank you for the floor. Thank you, Simon.
Thank you very much. Any other questions or comments to our panelists here in the room? If not, would you like to pick up that question, comment? Yeah.
I'm happy to go first. I think thank you very much for the question, because it was something that I wanted to also discuss, because the opportunity shouldn't be seen in a uniform way. This is a huge opportunity for both the developed and the developing world to come together, and that's why the categorization of green as well, and green sort of services and goods, needs to be broadened as well, because we're seeing that opportunity across various continents as well, and especially for us in the UK, that's where partnerships become really important for the transfer of learning. Again, my example of solar, for instance, or take the development of electric vehicles as well. We've developed the policy here in the UK through various different means of legislation. How can we share that with other countries globally who have greater populations? How do you uptake, electric vehicles and also manage a grid that has to sustain more demands? So there is a lot of sharing of best practice that needs to happen. And there will be innovations that we don't know today that will come also in the future. So it's important to be working through forums like this, other global forums as well, making sure that funding from the UK as well has a clean green initiative that's looking to invest globally in projects as well. So we've got a huge role to play in that at a national level. But also coming back to the discussion, this is also about the role of business as well. And what we've seen through things like COP26 last year is this real imperative now for businesses to engage, because they realize that they supersede, they go beyond just political cycles as well. So if you want your business to be here in the next 10 years and to excel, you will be operating in that environment. So you have this inherent sense of duty as well to be thinking about these factors. And that again is a big step change, where you're seeing businesses carve out funding or grants, etc., just so that they can be at the vanguard of some of these collaborations globally. So we as a business community as well have a huge role in being part of those partnerships and bringing people together.
Thank you. Anything, Mansoor or Esther, that you want to add on that?
Yeah, actually, it is now we're expanding the. Oh, am I on mute? Yeah, no. Okay. We can actually now expand on the, how partnership and to shift the resources from the have and have not. It's not just about the rich and the poor. I just give you an example. Like for Singapore, we are renewable energy challenged. Okay, with land scarce, we have no wind power, no hydropower. We only, the most reliable is actually solar. But because of land scarcity, we hardly have space to build solar plant. That's why we put solar on water, on reservoir, on rooftops and all that. So these are the things that we are like really, how can we open up to tap onto our ASEAN neighbors? And that was also why we recently actually signed a deal with Laos to bring in hydropower to Singapore. So because there are countries who have resources, excessive resources. There are countries who are very, very lack of resources. So how could we, through trading, through, all this, can actually, almost like a barter trade. What you need is what I can offer. What I need is you can offer. So then we also created something that actually a public-private partnership in a way is the Climate Impact Exchange, which is actually using nature-based solution, which is formed by actually backed by 4 parties, which is actually the Singapore Stock Exchange, Temasek, Standard Chartered Bank and DBS Bank. So these 4 came together to come up with this so-called, which actually just now Mansoor was talking about carbon credit trading. So this is the carbon trading is a bit different from the normal conventional one. They only support projects that are like afforestation, mainly nature-based solutions. So in a way that private sector like us, we also offer to pilot it and as to purchase, credit. And we know that which are the rainforests, which are the afforestation that we are supporting using carbon credit. So that add value to, we are not just buying, our scene, just buying credit. And we have to look at the totality. When we talk about buying credit, we have to set a limit only to buy it, to offset the residual. So you have to look at from from how we design, build, and, orientate a building to, up to the last part of it to completion, and only the residuals, carbon, then we look at, buying carbon credits. So we actually look at multiple solutions, whether it is even district cooling and energy efficiency type of, solutions. There are plenty of technologies, but how do you mix and match and come up with solutions that suit your, your location? We use AI to design building that to reduce heat gain right up front by 20%, just using, digital twins and all that. So there are a lot of solutions, but businesses must make an effort to really look at it, right from day one. Yeah.
Thank you, Esther. Mansoor, do you want to add anything?
I think language is really important, actually, when we think about the question that's been asked. I think energy transition is actually only true for the developed world. For the rest of the world, is about energy access to begin with, right? So the transition and access are two different equations. The transition, you have an incumbent that needs to be changed, etc. And that's our journey. And access is a different journey. And both of them have different scopes. But as often, things are often designed with that sort of Western mindset or developed country mindset, unfortunately. So I think that's something I would encourage people to separate between energy transition and energy access to begin with. The other thing is it needs to be an equitable energy access or equitable energy transition. When I say equitable, it needs to also be fair, because the conditions described in Singapore are very different from the conditions in Rwanda or the UK or etc. Right? And each country can play their role in towards cleaner air. Right, but what makes sense in the UK versus in a country like Africa or a country like Asia might be radically different. And what is true, and this is the truth, is a lot of developed countries are built upon relaxed laws and overconsumption of fossil fuels. There's no going around it. And again, sorry, I keep on repeating myself on this front, but I'm very passionate about it. I think a fair carbon or a carbon trading mechanism or ETS mechanism that's global in nature, that's equitable towards developing countries, that is really not taking German credits from German producers to German savers, but is international in nature, that opens up more participants in those markets, I think can have a very equitable impact for the air that we breathe.
Just to come in on that point, Mansoor, I think that's really interesting around the definitions, because I think what we've seen across Europe in the last year is that we've really understood also how we use energy. There was a little bit of a thought that it was given, and now across the public and also businesses and policymakers, for the first time, we are really examining which parts of the economy uses energy and in what way, and we're separating our economies to understand where did the demands come, but also going through this education piece as well. So you're right, we're on different stages, you know, even across the continent of what a transition looks like, and that's where the opportunity lies for other parts of the world that can, as you rightly noted, leapfrog what we're doing and actually teach us how to make these changes, because we've come so used to doing things in a certain lifestyle way. Whereas now, sort of this winter, we're talking about, you know, using less energy and being more energy conscious. And it's taken this situation to really bring that to the forefront of our minds.
Tanya, absolutely, I agree with that. Transformational moment for us all. I've got a couple of questions from people online. I'm not sure whether they just want to pose the question or they'd like to speak to them, but I've got Shafid Hassan, who was asking about how trade agreements and treaties can ensure the measures taken by a company or others keep our environment safe and green. And then I think I've also got Christian Haredi, who also wanted to come in. Christian or Shafid, did you want to come in now so we can take the views of our panelists? If not, Professor, can I just kind of put the question that Shafid put about how trade agreements and treaties can ensure the measures taken by a company keep our environment safe and green? And I know you've alluded to it a bit already. But the role of trade agreements, I suppose, and that may be as much free trade agreements as multilateral ones. Any thoughts on that? Any of the three of you?
I'm happy to take a stab, sort of a brief overview. Obviously, the first principle being that both bilateral and multilateral trade agreements can include provisions relating to environment. So making sure that there are sustainable development chapters in FTAs, but also including a focus on joint cooperation between trading partners on environmental issues, so that, you know, you're making sure that you're measuring it. But also bringing sort of civil society, including businesses, into those discussions. You know, as you're sort of developing that FTA, engaging in that process, and making sure that obviously there is wider agreement at a WTO level on the importance of including sustainability and climate within FTAs. But that has to be an ongoing conversation, and obviously we've got a long way to go in that process, and we're already starting those discussions here in the UK.
Thank you, Tanya. Anything, Mansour or Esther, you wanted to add on that?
One thing in Africa is quite difficult. There are 54 countries in Africa, and sometimes it's easier to ship products back to China, repair them, and ship them back to Africa. Because sometimes coordination between neighbors, especially West to East Africa, would be, I think, extremely beneficial. It's way above my pay grade, but I would be very happy to see that being fixed.
Very good. Esther. Sure, you're mute for once. I can't hear you, Esther.
Sorry, my apology. Yeah, not particularly on the FTA, but I want to also, quote some examples that innovation can be, can take place cross borders, and also, with partnership as well. And, through some competition with MIT, actually we unearthed some, really, really brilliant idea, making, marine waste to turn into building bricks and all that. So this is from an Indian, a little village, from some innovator. So we are also, helping them to mentor them to bring to the, the so-called developed economy to help them scale up and hopefully to reach out to a larger market. So I think there are many ways that we can collaborate and, to see how we can have a, like I earlier said, that we can actually tap onto the model of sharing economy and also circular economy can combine together to, build a more sustainable and, greener world together. Yeah.
Thank you. Is there anything you wanted to add, Mansour? Can I just be kind of just a sort of as a last question to the three of you? This is, well, at least for me, a very rich event, and it's great to hear your very practical ideas and your kind of lived experience of how the world of the workplace is changing and how that's actually pushing you to green your businesses and the extraordinary opportunities there are out there. But kind of we have this environment week once a year. We have the public forum once a year. I mean, can I ask you just kind of what sort of interaction would you like to be seeing between your businesses, between business in general and us as trade negotiators?
If you ask
would you like to go first? Go on, Esther. Go on.
Yes, if you ask me, I always feel that sustainability should be at the core of every discussion, not just in the sustainability, professionals, but, it could, it has to be like even political leaders, people controlling, the money, and trade agreement and all that. So, sustainability has to be, the decision from the heart and also from the head as well. So I think if every level of decision making that we can put sustainability as the core, I'm sure we can help to save the world, to keep it below the global warming below 1.5 degree.
Thank you, Esther. Mansour?
One of the reasons I was interested in joining this panel was my own personal fear about what's happening around the world, the sort of the reversal of globalization in some ways, the more restrictions of trade and them and us sort of stuff. The reality is that if you want to talk about sustainability and energy transition or energy access, these are global problems that require global solutions that need global cooperation, right? Without that, it's going to be impossible to achieve the targets that we set out, and we all are going to be end losers on that. The reality is that software is made in one part of the world, hardware is made in another part of the world, a different part of the world uses those software and hardware to produce another product that's sold somewhere else. If that's fundamental nature of fluidity of the market that's happened since the Second World War starts going away, it's going to be devastating, and the human cost and environmental costs are going to be enormous. So one thing I would love to encourage anyone and anyone involved in this is that it needs to be an increase of globalization, an increase of free trade, an increase of cooperation, rather than anything else, if nothing else for the sake of environment.
Brilliant. Mansoor and Tanya, last word to you.
Thank you. I think, more increasingly sort of structured engagement opportunities for businesses. I think we've got several across the calendar year, but making sure that, everything from the WTO forum this week on environment and trade, to the Clean Energy Ministerial, to New York Climate Action Week, to COP27 and beyond, we've got all of these fixtures in the calendar. So making sure that there's more interconnectivity between what we're discussing, but also measuring progress. Also, progress won't just happen overnight either. So we need to be understanding of at least having these open dialogues and metrics as part of that. But both to Esther's point and Mansoor's point, this is everybody's responsibility. To date, it's just been reserved as, it'll just be the energy public policy makers or those who focus on energy or focus on climate. The imperative is for everybody now. This is the way that you're operating, the way, if your business is going to survive, or us as individuals, as nations, is impacted by the climate. And every year we get reminded by these events that are happening globally. So it's not just a one-off event. And I think what we saw at COP26 last year was that real key milestone moment where nobody refuted the scientific evidence. That was a huge moment for us. Everybody was in agreement. So how do you keep mobilizing that going forwards, irrespective of the wider headwinds that we're going to face as a global economy as well? So keeping this sort of laser focused mindset that this is something that we collectively agree on, that we want to make progress on. So to negotiators and individuals in your position, just keep making sure it's on everybody's agenda, and it's not just a talking point, but we're talking about action as well.
Thank you for those sorry words, which rather echoes something I said this morning, actually, the panel that kicked off this Trade Environment Week about the need to kind of move from discussions to action. So thank you for bringing us kind of full circle there. And look, thanks to all three of you for bringing such energy to our discussions and such kind of practical experience and ideas about how business is transforming its operations and how we can learn from some of that and work with you to affect this change to a kind of not only a greener global trading system, but also a more inclusive and sustainable one as well. So thank you for that. It's been great hearing your experiences and your insights, and my thanks to everybody who's joined us either here in the sun-splashed splendor of Geneva or online. Thank you very much indeed, everybody, for being here this afternoon. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for having me. Thank you.